Kirtan ki jai, Radha Madhava ki jai, prema.
He's coming.
He's coming.
And it's recording now.
They can hear it. Om Abhyana Nirandasya Jnanandana Sarakaya Chakshurmridamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajunamrita Bhujo Pranakavadatu Sankirtanai Vipitaro Kamalaya Tattva Vishwambaro Dijavaro Yuga Dharma Halo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karanavataro Vande Shri Krishna Caitanya Nityanando Sahodito Gauraraye Pushpabandho Chitra Sandho Tamundo Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Tarana Sakho Sukhado Paramanando Sundaro Subhapriyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Taptakansangolangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishwabhamanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Shri Krishna Guru ki jai, Shri Gaurada Madhava ki jai, Shri Kartik Bhatt ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanand. Today is the beginning of Kartik, the last month of Kartik, and that has the last of 4 months of the Chaturmasya that are months in India influenced by the monsoons, and to a large extent serve as an opportunity to stay within. And met with some rain today also. I've stayed inside. we had to stay inside for 4 months, and it became quite inside, so quite internal. So that's an opportunity for introspection and increased spiritual practice, just by the very nature of the climate. We don't have the same climate. We don't have monsoon season here in North America. And the Chatur Masya, the 4 months of the rainy season, observances of it, which are described in the secret text, the Hindus, Puranas, and whatnot, is not something that itself constitutes an anga or a limb of the body, angi of bhakti. Nonetheless, the great Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur did observe the 4 months of the rainy season in terms of various austerities and commitment and so forth, and in a very extreme way. And so a good number of his followers have done so also, or in modified ways have adopted a similar practice. I think that the practice itself, as observed by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, was more like some of the austerities we find in the lives of the founding acharyas, the Goswamis, who were described, for example, as living under a different tree every night, eating only a little bit of yogurt every other day or something like that, or forgetting to eat and sleep and so forth, and who set a very extraordinary standard of renunciation that's similar to that of the Mayavadins, the Tyagis, the Apasvis, and so forth, some of whom we've mentioned of late, with regard to their commitment to sadhana, to go naked and walk off into the Himalayas, just to realize that I am consciousness and not matter. While, as we mentioned, while we don't typically perform such austerities, we should embrace our sadhana with the same type of intensive commitment. And their examples are useful to us in this regard. But again, that said, these types of austerities, whatever it may be, in the typical, the carnival sense, lying on the bed of nails and so forth, which people do in India, there are people like that. These types of austerities are not the austerities of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Their austerities are observing Ekadasi, for example, and the holy days of Janmashtami, which involves some level of fasting, but primarily increased devotional practices. Overall, the idea is that the austerities perform the renunciation, if you will, the tyag, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism is a byproduct of the Gaudiya's positive, much as vairagya, detachment has a negative connotation, as a byproduct of their positive pursuit of love of Krishna. So if you love someone, then you tend to forego the things that are not pleasing to them. So there is a measure of austerity, but it's a byproduct. It's not that the means. Austerity is not the means. Detachment is not the part of the means, as it is in yoga and jnana. But it is a result that comes about as a kind of a secondary result of bhakti. Vasudevi bhakti bhakti yoga prayojana janayati ashvairagyam jnanam chaya. Quickly, by the execution of bhakti, one comes to knowledge, and the corollary of knowledge, of course, is detachment. And this is, again, the detachment of things, favorable to bhakti. At the same time, we see, as I'm mentioning, the Swami set a very extreme standard of renunciation. The description of Raghunath Das Goswami is particularly intimidating, and how he lived in Jagannath Puri and gradually, step by step, became more and more renounced with regard to eating, which is kind of the bottom line of life. If you eat, you live. It's thought. And he used to get, because he was in rich parentage, although he renounced and his parents gave up the prospect of recapturing him for material life, they nonetheless sent him a stipend every month in Jagannath Puri. And so he would spend the money to hold festivals for Caitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates and feed them very sumptuously with Jagannath Prasad. And then he thought, what kind of renunciate am I? I'm living here and I'm getting money from home. So he stopped accepting the money from home and used to then stand in front of the lion's gate of the Jagannath temple with a begging bowl and accept what he was given in the course of the day of Jagannath Prasad from the pilgrims coming out of the temple. And then he went further and said that, oh, in my mind, I tend to think that guy gave yesterday, I should go over to him. That guy, I don't think he didn't give, I won't go after him. And I found myself, he describes, as making this kind of discrimination that one person was more important in my life than another, in terms of its material sustenance. And so he gave that up, and then he ultimately was found by Caitanya Mahaprabhu himself in the back of the temple, where after the prasadam had been offered and distributed, and the little undistributable, it might be thought, remnants were given to the cows, he was found there picking out pieces of rice that the cows had not yet taken out or had left, washing them off. And this is what he was eating. Caitanya Mahaprabhu went there and intervened and said, what is this? You're having another feast and you're not inviting me. So a very extreme example. It's not the one that we're called to follow by the example or teachings of our acharyas in the line of succession. Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj at one point described the work of the Goswamis, the acts of the Goswamis with regard to the type of overt renunciation we see in them as the work that's involved in making a necklace out of gems that first involves drilling a hole in the gems. And that's the hard work. And they left for us putting the string through. That's all. After all, they were forming a sampradaya. And in the context of forming a sampradaya, well, there were competing ideas. And one of the dominant competing ideas was the idea of the Advaita Vedanta, also known as Mayavada. And this is a form of the Gyan Marg, for reasons that we'll hear tonight in the course of our discussion of Caitanya-lila, the ongoing discussion, a questionable form of the Gyan Marg, but nonetheless, as such, conceived of as such by its founder, Shankaracharya, it has as one of its limbs of the body of its practice, the culture, direct culture of renunciation. So typically the Mayavadis in the time of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, at least I don't know what they do now, but they would set an extreme example of renunciation. And so here the Goswamis were establishing the teaching of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, which is all about the love affairs of Radha and Krishna. And they were meditating on those affairs, writing about them, hearing, chanting, putting those affairs to poetry and music and so on and so forth. And as we have seen in this narrative thus far, the 7th chapter of the Adi-lila, where Caitanya Mahaprabhu is dealing with Prakashananda in Benares, his hearing and chanting and dancing in the streets was questionable in the mind of Prakashananda Saraswati. This isn't the duty of a sannyasi, it's to be renounced and study the Vedanta and so on and so forth. And so at the time of the Goswamis, their new religion, if you will, of course it's a religion of ancient times and eternal and whatnot, but it was manifesting in a particular form due to the appearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the teachings that he imparted to the Goswamis, certain interpretation, understanding of the sacred texts and so forth. So given that the more prominent idea of spirituality was the overt was thought to be something that is otherworldly, and that might be or not of this world, I should say, was demonstrated or was manifest in persons who were extremely renounced. They would wear the red cloth or no cloth, and they would be renounced. And so this, if acquisition is material life, material acquisition, then giving up things is spiritual life. And the more you've given up, the more you overtly exhibit renunciation, the more you would be thought by the people in general to be a person of spiritual credentials and worthy of association, praise, learning from, and so on and so forth. So this was and still is in many respects the common kind of thinking. Therefore, it said Vaishnava Kriyamudra Vignana Buddha. It's difficult to understand the activities of a Vaishnava, which could be like that of an ordinary person. And there are many examples in the lives of the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who lived as householders and even as wealthy persons, members of the government. We find even in more modern times, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, a magistrate, and so on and so forth, at least for the better part of his life. And it was during that time as a magistrate and bearing, along with his wife, begetting a number of children, 10, 12 children. It was during that time that he was writing his extraordinary works and teaching and so forth. The last 4 years of his life, he sealed himself off from the public in his bhajan mood, but his contribution philosophically, theologically came in those times. So he was vital and alive spiritually as a householder and with a household of sizable, considerable size, and all that goes with that, and a job in the British government, and so on and so forth. So the Goswamis were again establishing a sampradaya, and they had this idea to kind of compete with, in a sense. And if they were going to be meditating upon Radha and Krishna and singing songs about them and so forth, in order to bring credibility to their lineage, they also set an extraordinary example of renunciation that to show that they could compete, if you will, in that regard with the Mayavadis, to show that, yes, Vasudevi Bhagavati, I cited this earlier, Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita, Janiyati Ashuvairagyam Jnanam Chayavoitikam, Bhagavatam says. Bhakti to Vasudeva, very quickly comes knowledge and detachment, which is thought to be small things, according to Rupa Goswami, and not the means. Jnana and Vairagya are particularly underscored in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in the section in which Rupa Goswami is describing the limbs of bhakti. They're underscored, Jnana and Vairagya, as something that as something that do not constitute limbs of bhakti. Still, they come within the bhakta in due course. And so they showed a very overt example of renunciation, and arguably got some, you have to deal with the times and package your presentation accordingly. And so they did so, and their renunciation is sung about, for example, by Srinivasacharya, and it's was not small in measure. It would frighten some of the Mayavadis. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did the same thing. He frightened the big sannyasis, Brahmananda Bharati, Keshava Bharati, Brahmananda Puri, Paramananda Puri, and so on. There were 9 sannyasis very elderly to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and some of them coming, if not all of them, from the Shankar lineage, as Keshava Bharati did, the Puris, Bharatis. These were all names, sannyas names from the Shankar Sampradaya. Tirtha was a name taken up by the Madhavas. We don't find any Tirthas amongst the 9 roots, metaphorical roots of the tree of love of God. They were rooted in renunciation, in a sense. I mean, that's not the best term, perhaps. It's really rooted in love of Krishna, of which the result is renunciation. But nonetheless, there's a as much as there's a going up of the tree of love of God, there's a going down also. There is to the bhakti, there is a Vedanta, there is wisdom, there is knowledge, and it does correspond with the foregoing of the pursuit of sense objects for the pleasure of my own senses. We do it in a different way, because it's one thing to forego the pursuit of sense objects for my own pleasure, and another thing to pursue sense objects for the pleasure of Krishna's senses. That's something we do anyway, so we pursue the sense objects and pursue it for Krishna's senses is arguably easier to do than foregoing such interaction with sense objects at all, which seems impossible, difficult if not impossible. You understand? We are made up of senses, so to speak, physically speaking. So, at any rate, the Swami set a very extraordinary example of this kind of tyag. And my point is that in the modern times, at a time when Gaudiya Vaishnavism, hundreds of years after its having been found and so forth, was in a state of disrepair and misrepresentation, to a large extent. Thakur Bhaktivinoda identified 12 or 13 different sects that themselves identified themselves as followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but whose underlying siddhanta, scriptural conclusions, philosophy was not in accord with that of Rupa Goswami. And his ardent follower, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, whom Bhaktivinoda empowered to carry on with the kind of the work of Bhaktivinoda to bring out from within this confusion and highlight and underscore through his writing and example the actual teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He himself was thought that the teachings of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas and their understanding of the Bhagavad was deplorable. He was taught that. But he came to find out that wasn't the case, of course, when he studied the Bhagavad in light of the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, as represented by our beloved and most revered Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami and Chaitanya Charitamrita. So anyway, he is not that Gaudiya Vaishnavism wasn't alive and well, but it's in the popular sector. It was thought to be something like the Hare Krishna movement, if you will. So he tried to give it the dignity that it deserved in intellectual circles and write about it extensively, as I say, set a good example. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was commissioned and empowered by him to continue that. And the very pranam, one of the pranams or prayers in offering of respect to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur includes the idea that if the teaching is against that of Rupa Goswami's Siddhanta, then he was not, he could not tolerate that. He wanted the true teachings of Rupa Goswami to be established. And the misrepresentation of that was troublesome to him, as it was to Bhaktivinoda. So, this is the climate. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as we know, was referred to by a popular journalist as the seventh Goswami, because his work in some ways paralleled that of the six Goswamis, who were the founding acharyas of the whole sampradaya. They founded it by way of their literature, by way of their interpretation of the sacred texts that were sacred to all the lineages, like the Vedanta Sutra, the Bhagavatam, the Gita, and so well, we have our own understanding of it, and that's how they formed the lineage, and also under the directive of Mahaprabhu, Sanatana and Gopal Bhatta Goswamis, they wrote about the procedures, the decorum, the ways of the Gaudiyas, how they will eat and sleep and marry and worship the deity, what are their mantras, and so on and so forth. This is Hari Bhakti Vilas, a book composed of many citations from the greater body of the sacred text that form kind of a smriti for the Gaudiyas. And that is also in consideration of the times that they were in and how they had to showcase the sampradaya, that it would be credible in terms of how people thought about things religious at the time. So as we see some adjustment to the renunciation, standard of the renunciation of the Goswamis, we also see some adjustment with regard to the adherence to the dictums of the Hari Bhakti Vilas. Once I was sitting with Srivatsa Goswami, who's in the family of Radharaman Goswamis, and because they are followers of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and they worship his deity, Radharaman. We were discussing a certain point. He was telling me that in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, I was aware of it, but the guru was described as being a householder. Householders should be the gurus. And he left out another part of the verse that says, and they should be handsome. So you can see there's some relativity to the verse there. I didn't pull it on him, but because our guru, it was a subtle way in which he was actually criticizing my guru, who was a sannyasi, and the sannyas of Bhakti Siddhanta, which is an anga, a limb of the Gyan Marg, that he included in his mission to show a standard of renunciation, to distinguish the Gaudiyas from the reputation they had of being licentious at the time, in the name of being Babajis, pursuing the parakya in this world, rather than in the other world. So at any rate, I don't remember if I said that to him. I don't know if he's particularly good looking. I can't remember. Of course, that's all in the eye of the beholder. But I think I did mention it to him. But he said, another thing he said to me is that you will not find anyone who more closely follows the Hari Bhakti Vilas than our lineage. And I said, yes, and that's my point. No one more closely, but even you don't follow it entirely. So it has some relativity to it, and that is to be determined by the Acharya, because it is somewhat of a preaching strategy, if you will, to form the sampradaya in consideration of the times and give it credibility in the eyes of the people. And if you don't have rituals, and like the smartas, which is the other side of the tyagis in the Shankar lineage, you have the renunciates, and then you have the Brahmins in the religious sector, and they were what did I say? What was it? Smartas. And so then they got all kind of rituals, and they got the whole everything. You can't do anything. You can't move without them. If you're a religious person, they got to bless everything you do, and they get their sustenance from that. So they kind of had monopoly on religion. And then it was thought in the Shankar lineage that you have to take birth as a Brahmin, and then in that life, one of those lives as a Brahmin, you have to take sannyas and be a tyagi, and then you can realize that Brahman and Atma are one. There is no world, and there is no real Atma, Jivatma, and so forth. That's part of their teaching. We're in this section of Chaitanya Charitamrita now. But at any rate, this was the work of the Goswamis, and the work of Bhaktivinoda is somewhat similar. He wrote many books. He tried to excavate what the real teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were out of a kind of a kitchery of different misrepresentations that were prominent. Again, the real idea was alive and well, Bhaktivinoda himself had teachers and so on and so forth. But the popular sense of what Gaudiya Vaishnava was such that if a Gaudiya Vaishnava would come to your door and you were a pious, educated Hindu and ask for a alms, and your house assistant would say, "Oh, it's a Gaudiya, it's going to give us some fruit and tell them to go away." If it was somebody else, they might come and learn something from it. There's nothing to learn from the Gaudiya people, but give them some food anyway. So this was an unfortunate situation, and I say Bhaktivinoda Thakur sought to rectify it, and he empowered Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to continue on with that work, and he did so in a way that was more overt than the way in which Bhaktivinoda thought to do it. He was rather indirect, and the example of Prabhupada that used to cite, I don't know where he got that from, in like a needle and out like a plow. So if you stuck a needle in your stomach, it would go in rather easily, but it had somehow inside it became like a plow or an anchor, and when you pull it out, it would make a bigger hole. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was like in like a needle and out like a plow. There's a famous story of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as a young lad coming to see his father, Bhaktivinoda, who was meeting with a famous Sahajiya. The Sahajis are a different lineage that attaches themselves to Caitanya Charitamrita and the Goswamis, and they cite the Caitanya Charitamrita fully and so on and so forth, but they have a very different take than the Orthodox take in many respects. Of course, they see that you have to do parakiya now, and it's a tantric type of a sexual affair, and Radha and Krishna are the within, and ultimately it ends in Mayavad, the Sahajiya doctrine. So Radha and Krishna is a metaphor for the man-woman get together, they do the tantric sex as part of the sadhana. I'm simplifying it, obviously. But it's very sophisticated in terms of its, it sounds pretty, well, obviously that's wrong, kind of to us, because we've taught in a certain way, but they have commentaries on major texts of the Gaudiyas and so on and so forth. So anyway, Bhaktisiddhanta came and saw, and then he, at a distance, he paid respects to Bhaktivinoda. And so the Sahajiya said to Bhaktivinoda, "Oh, you're a very nice boy. See, he sees you from a distance like this, and he pays respect." And Bhaktivinoda says, "Well, he's nice, yeah, but the reason he's done that is because he's taken a vow not to come within 100 feet of a Sahajiya." And you are a Sahajiya, so Bhaktivinoda was talking about, and Bhaktisiddhanta, in like a needle, Bhaktivinoda and out like a plow, Bhaktisiddhanta, and he was kind of rather disturbing in a way for many people, in his very confrontational type of approach. So that's not the only approach. We can see Bhaktivinoda had a non-confrontational approach, and much to be gained from that. So that's all the call of the Acharya at the time, how to proceed. So in light of this, again, Bhaktivinoda was thought to be like the seventh coach in the public. This is, again, a popular journalist of Calcutta proclaimed him the seventh Goswami. So he was doing exactly what he wanted, to bring intellectual respectability into the pious and intellectual circles of Hindus in Calcutta to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which it didn't have at the time. So successful in that, he wrote many books. He established the places of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes in Navadvip, just like the Goswamis did, establish the places of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, and so forth. And so this was the climate of the times, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, in light of that, and this is my point, during the Chaturmasya, which was followed by the Mayavadins, he followed it very strictly and showed a very extreme standard of renunciation. He used to eat once a day with his hands behind his back, and only as much as he could eat while leaning over like this on the plate, and the plate was filled with havishan, which is a type of like khichdi with no spices or salt. And he did that for 4 months. He would do it regularly. So it was a very extreme standard of renunciation frightening to others, but obviously he was a devotee also. And so it was a result of his renunciation, and he was showing it to the public. And in that way, like the Goswamis, I want to say, we're doing, establishing that Gaudiya Vaishnavism is as renounced, not more than the Mayavad philosophy, and it's not about parakia or paramour love, adultery in this life, and that's what Nachitama was not teaching. He was a brahmacharya, Naistika brahmacharya from birth. He practiced celibacy and so forth. So this is a little bit of our lineage. So we followers of Bhakti, depends what stream you have coming from the I guess you would call, Bhaktisiddhanta would call himself the puddle of the ocean of Bhakti Vinod. He once said, Bhakti Vinod once said that he had the darshan of Panchatattva chanting in Navadvip, and he considered himself to be a sweeper in front of the kirtan of the Panchatattva. I had the opportunity to be in Mayapur in 1974, and part of the fulfilling of the prediction of Bhakti Vinod that people from all over the world would chant on the streets in Mayapur, Jai Satchidananda, Jai Satchidananda, people from Europe and all over in Latin America, North America, so forth around the world there, Asia also actually. And we were chanting Jai Satchidananda, and people, ladies, were coming out in front of the Sankirtan with a pot of water, washing the street in front of us, taking a plate of sweets, putting it on the wash place, lying down pranams like this, offering to the Sankirtan party. It was so beautiful, so charming. So Bhakti Vinod envisioned himself like somebody sweeping the streets in front of the Kirtan, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And hearing this, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, and I am one straw in the broom of Bhakti Vinod. So if Bhakti Vinod is ocean, then Bhaktisiddhanta probably consider himself like a puddle or something like that. We're like, then there are different streams that are drops, and we're kind of evaporated. We're kind of like what are they called, dried or something. Dehydrated. So we get a drop from the puddle of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. There are a number of lineages and so forth, and these tears, we'll call them, tears of love for the Paribar of Bhakti Vinod. They have different ways approach the observance of the Chaturmasya, which again is not technically a limb of Bhakti. Some follow it more strictly than others. Nobody's following it like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. No talk, no individual, no group. Our Guru Maharaj, Om Vishnupad, Bhaktivedanta Swami, Prabhupada, didn't follow it much at all, really, and didn't instruct us much of anything about following it. That said, we are talking about the Chaturmasya because, as I mentioned, this is the Kartik Mas beginning today, the month of Kartik, which is the last month of the 4 months of the rainy season. And it, by contrast to the observance of the Chaturmasya, observing the Kartik Vrata, is a limb of Bhakti. It's mentioned in the Padma Purana also. It's mentioned in terms of something like an instance where you can do something small and get a big result. A little service goes a long way, something like that. It is the month that precedes the month that Krishna says he is identified with in the Gita. He says, I am the month of Margashirsha. That's the following month, also known as what? I forget the other name, but anyway, that's the Gita name. And preceding that is the Damodar month, also known as Kartik month. And so Radha, of course, precedes Krishna, Radha Krishna, Radha Govinda, Radha Madan Mohan, Radha Gokul Nanda, Radha Gopinath, and of course we can't forget Kishore Kishori, which was Prabhupada's deities in Chicago, in which Kishore, Krishna, is mentioned first and Radharani is mentioned second. And Prabhupada was asked about it. He says, save the best for the last. So no difference there. Jai Radhe. This is her month. Sanatana Goswami has reasoned that if the following month is the month of Krishna, then the one that precedes must be the month of Radha. It's the month of the Urja Vrata. So a time for in which the Shakti of Bhagavan is honored, and so it is observed. And so this is the first day, but worth mentioning something about it before we enter into the discussion of continue the discussion, I should say, of Chaitanya Lila, which at this point starts to become a little drier, perhaps, in that Mahaprabhu is going to explain that, as he understands, the shortcomings of the Mayavad philosophy that Prakashananda Saraswati Thakur was harboring and teaching, and which caused him to question the activities of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now that part is over. He's no longer questioning the activities of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu was explained, my hearing and chanting, by the way, you have said that as the duty of a sannyasi is to study the Vedanta, not to dance and sing in public. But he said, if you actually know the scriptures, then you would know it's Kali Yuga. And in Kali Yuga, there's a Yuga Dharma, and it happens to be Nam Sankirtan. That's what I'm doing, he said. And it has an extraordinary effect. It makes a person mad. I don't dance because I want to, but I can't stop. The name takes over and makes me dance, makes me cry and laugh and act like a madman. I asked my guru about it. I got the Krishna mantra from him and Krishna name from him. This is what it did to me. And I myself had questions about it. So I asked my guru, he said, that's what we want. That's the result we're looking for. You're doing it right. Very desirable. And so hearing this description, scripturally supported as it was, and seeing, of course, the person of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his humility compared to the pride of the Mayavadins who think they've become God, if you will, Om Narayan, as they respect one another by taking sannyas. Now the Atma has become Narayan. That's the thought. So anyway, he was, through his humility and obviously his knowing of the essence of the scripture. He wasn't like a jnani who didn't portray himself as such. His guru said, you're a fool, you can't study Vedanta. We see he knew the essence of Vedanta, and the essence of Vedanta is Kali Yuga, is Krishna Nam Sankirtan. So, Krishna Lolya, to be eager for Krishna. And he comes in the form of his name primarily. So at this point, Prakashananda Saraswati is ready to learn from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu has created a teachable moment, and now he is going to dissect or shed light on the shadowy idea of Vedanta presented by Acharya Shankar. And we heard Gona Britye Jeba Bhashya Kulila Acharya Taha Shravana Nasha Hoi Sarvakarja. That Mahaprabhu said that Sripad Shankaracharya has described the Vedic literature, in terms of Gonavritti, meanings. And to understand it in this way is to misunderstand it. Gonavritti means, again, indirect understanding. So there are some things, statements that we have to understand indirectly. The famous example is, my house is such and such down just a mile from here on the Ganges. So you have to interpret that to mean he means on the bank of the Ganges. It's not on the Ganges. So there's a reason for interpreting it indirectly. But most of the statements, there's no need for such. And Mahaprabhu will go on about this, but basically Shankar takes all the statements about the Godhead being eternal as a person and so forth, having qualities and beings that are eternal, and interprets them in terms of gonavritti, indirectly rather than directly. Like the famous statement of Dr. Radhakrishna in Gita that Prabhupada didn't appreciate when he said, Krishna sarvadharman prityaja mamikam sarvam, surrender to me. And Dr. Radhakrishna says, it's not to Krishna that we should surrender, but the Krishna that you are within yourself, something like that. Okay, he's saying one thing, and there's no need for the gonavritti explanation there, unless you've already plugged into Shankar's intellectual, scriptural kind of sleight of hand. That's the subject here. So he says, he continues, for tahar naika dosha, Ishwar agyapan, gonartha korila mukhya artha achariya. So he said this, that Shankar has done this, and it's the wrong way to do it, but then he absolves Shankar of any fault at the same time. This is peculiar. Shankar is, and Shiva for that matter, who Shankar is thought to be an incarnation of, is not a popular person in the Ramanuja Sampradaya, not a popular person in the Madhva Sampradaya, two lineages that strongly spoke against the interpretations of scripture given by Shankar that underlie the lineage of Vedanta, and they were in huge kind of overt battles, if you will, amongst the intellectual and spiritually minded community of India, of whether it's Dvaita or Advaita or Vishishta Dvaita or so on and so forth. The Ramanujas won't enter a Shiva temple. The Madhvas have a mantra for persons to chant while passing urine. It's pretty extreme. I don't know the mantra, but the gist of it is, I'm passing urine on Shankar, basically, his ideas. It's pretty strong language. Sridhar said that about a group once. I urinate on their proposals. I won't mention where the proposals came from. Strong language. Sometimes appropriate. Shocking to make the point. So, by contrast, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission is much more appreciative of Shiva and Shankar. Tripurari is the name for Shiva, so it's an example of that. And Mahaprabhu visited the Shankar, the Shiva temples in South India, and so on and so forth. And we understand Shiva to have a representation, very extraordinary one in the context of bhakti. I mean, Bhagavatam says in the very last chapter, Vaishnavana Mitashambhu, Shiva is a great Vaishnav, and he has a place in Vrindavan as the Chitrapal, but the other place, of the Dham, he's the Pal, the protector. And there are several places in the Brajmandal where the Shiva lingas are established, and different manifestations of Shiva protecting the Dham. Of course, he's also stationed outside the Rasa-lila dance. Rasa-lila Stali, the place of the Rasa dance. Gopishwar, famous Shiva lingam worshipped by everybody in Vrindavan. Sometimes they dress him like a gopi lingam. So we have a different approach to that. We find a very respectable, dignified place for Shiva, and we address Shankaracharya as well, Acharya and Sripad and so forth, with some regard here, and we absolve him of any fault, as Mahaprabhu has here through the pen of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Says, Taha nahika dosha. So, but, however, there is no dosha, no fault, nahika dosha. There is no fault for Tahan, for him, for Shankaracharya. There's no fault in what he's done. Why? Because Ishwar Agyapan, he is following Agya, the order of Ishwar. So his teaching is thought to be ordered, Shiva's teaching, by the Ishwar, Vishnu. Gunartha Karila Mukhya Artha Acharila. So to cover the real purpose and the Mukhya Vritti that speaks so strongly. There's so many statements in the scripture about the eternality of the form of Krishna, the eternality of his name, qualities, and so forth. So to cover all of this, he was ordered to do this, it's said, by Vishnu. It seems like an odd thing for Vishnu to do, but there is confirmation of this in the Padma Purana. I think it's cited here. Here it is here, the relevant lines from Padma Purana. Maya vadam sachastram prapancham bodham uchate. Mayavadam asachastram. The doctrine of Mayavada is asachastram. It is against the Shastra. Prapanchanam bodham uchate. It is Buddhism in disguise. Now that's a strong statement, and the Advaitins may not like that. I have researched the matter in the past and not found any Advaitins that or any evidence, I should say, that there's a couple of verses here, but this is the main line we're concerned with, that, and no one that says that this is not in older manuscripts or something like that, and it's an interpolation, so it seems to be in the original Padma Purana, if you will. I have seen an attempt to try to interpret it otherwise, but it's pretty difficult because there's several verses that follow as well. I'll read the Prabhupada's translation with 3 verses from this Purana. Shiva informed his wife Parvati, the Mayavad philosophy is against the Shastra. It's covered Buddhism, my dear Parvati. In the form of a Brahmin in Kali Yuga, I teach this imagined Mayavad philosophy to cheat the atheists. I described the Godhead to be without form and without qualities. Similarly, I explained Vedanta. In explaining Vedanta, I described the Mayavad philosophy here to mislead people by denying the personal form of God. So, okay, it's pretty clear what's being said here in the verses. And it's not contested that these are not original verses and put in there by some unscrupulous Gaudiya person or a Manuja person, something like that, and that kind of thing happens. But then we're faced with, well, why would God do that? Why would God do that? And so the connection with Buddhism mentioned here, prapanchanam bodham uchate. I always forget that. Prachanam bodham uchate. A covered form, prachanam, of Buddhism is central to this idea. Now, the Gaudiya's spin on it, if you will, or take on it, is pretty interesting, in that we say that the Mayavad philosophy is very much like Buddhism. Buddhism says that there is
nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of nihilistic, that there's no Atma, and the Mayavadis say there's no Atma, also no individual self, but then they say that there is an underlying consciousness that's kind of like nothing, that you can't say anything about, you can't describe it, sometimes I describe it as, how do I describe it? Contentless awareness, whatever that is. Awareness with no content. It's compared itself in its own school to deep sleep. So in deep sleep, the physical body closes down, the mental body, the dream world closes down, and you're just deep sleep, and you're pretty restful. It's similar to thought of being similar to susupti, when the jivas merge back into Mahavishnu and sleep. Vishnu goes to sleep. Problem is that their karma is not yet absolved, and so they come out and the world starts again. But if the karma was absolved, they wouldn't get up. So it's like a huge, like, anesthesia. Just go down and that's it. You don't get up. And there's no more suffering. That's for sure. But is it desirable? And I mean, this was compared to a huge anesthesia or injection of some, what do they call it?
Narcotic.
An anesthetic or something. They put you out, way out. So that's similar to Buddhism. So these ideas, if you look carefully at them, they're very similar. Even though the Shankar fought with the Buddhists, debating and so forth, the bottom line, they're actually very similar, and this is the point of the Gaudiyas. And so they see Shankar as, given that I think must have been Ashok, was a Buddhist, a king, and when a king becomes whatever, so does the kingdom. So if the king becomes a Catholic, everybody becomes a Catholic. So when the king Ashok became Buddhist, then many people became Buddhists. And Buddhism is a kind of a take on the Upanishads of sorts, which is in contrast to the Purva Mimamsa, the Karmakanda section of the Vedas, which is about acquisition, rituals, magical mantras and so forth to get material results and so forth. He put that all aside, and in the context of that, of course, there were rituals that included animal slaughter. He objected to this, his doctrine of ahimsa, and an Upanishadic kind of take on life that at the same time dismisses the Upanishads and all the Vedas in terms of their being thought of as unauthored sounds, and he has an emphasis more on reason and introspection over revelation, but they're right where these two kind of meet, if you will. A beginning idea of revelation in the form of Shankar's take, accepting the Vedas, but interpreting them to a Buddhistic kind of conclusion. And then the Buddha rejecting the Upanishads, but having a Shankar-like form of non-Vedanta teaching. So, and this idea, we should note that they're very similar, is the way in which these teachings have come to be thought of in the modern day today. In the popular world of contemporary spirituality, Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta are just, for the most part, thought of being different ways of talking about the same thing. In fact, there are some Buddhist teachers who teach that there is an Atma, like Shankar was talking about, or there is something besides nothing. There is consciousness is eternal, something like that, and that there is an Atma. Shankar said there is an Atma, but he says ultimately there's not a Jivatma, an individual Atma. That's an illusion, and there's one self. It's Brahman, something like that. But there are some Buddhists who teach similarly and say that the Buddha, as a matter of strategy, did not emphasize the idea of a self, because his main teaching was there is no self in reference to the false self. So if I say there's no self because you're not a woman, you're not a man, you're not American, that's all false, false, false. And then at the same time, I try to tell you, and there's a real self, and I do try to tell it to people because that's our teaching. And they can get pretty far by telling them there's no self, and then you start talking about the real self, and then you say, no, they're still with me. Their head's going around a little bit. And so there are some Buddhists who believe that the Buddha taught, and they cite the Pali Canon and so forth to support their perspective that this was a strategy of the Buddha get people to deconstruct the false self, and what's left will come out. And rather than talk about what it is, we don't have to talk about that. Let's just deconstruct the false self, because that is the source of suffering. You are identified with a passing phase of the ongoing transformation of material nature. You're not that passing phase of, and so let go of that, and all your suffering will go away. And there's truth to that. And then what's after that, we don't have to talk about that. God, Atma, there's no need to talk. Let's just talk about, to get down to the brass tacks. What's important? Look, you're suffering, right? The world's about suffering. Why are you suffering? Because you're thirsting for sense objects. And an identity is being formed on the basis of that. So deconstructed. Deconstructed. And you won't suffer anymore. Whatever that constitutes, we call it nirvana. Nirvana. It is distinguishing. Nirvana means to blow out. I don't mean to blow you out, but to blow out like a candle. To put out the, this extinguish this false conception of the self. And then emphasize this, what is really there, whatever that is, we don't have to talk about it, that will surface. We'll just call it nirvana. So this was his teaching. And so the idea from the Gaudiya Vaishnava point of view is that Vishnu empowered Shiva to speak the Mayavad philosophy to bring people in the direction of the Veda again after the Buddha. Now, why the Buddha did it is because of the idea that the dominant form of the adherence to the sacred texts of the Hindus was the Karma Kanda, and it involved himsa, especially in Kali Yuga, when horse sacrifice, cow sacrifice, and so forth. These seven things couldn't be done as they were thought to be conceived of in the scriptures without any ill effect, and indeed a positive effect for the animals involved. So some abuse of that, and abuse in general of the Veda, the Upanishads, or neglect of them, and the dominance of the Karma Kanda. So just in opposition to this, say, well, if the Vedas say this, so then we don't care for the Vedas. Let's try it that way. And bring people in the direction of renunciation and deconstruction of the false self, and so on and so forth. So this is all looked at from the Gaudiya perspective as you've got a festival, and you've got a keynote speaker, you've got a main band, and then you've got the secondary bands that play along with them. So Buddha's one of the earlier acts, and then Shankar comes in, and Ramanuja is playing, and comes Madhva, and finally Caitanya Mahaprabhu comes to the stage. Main act of Kali Yuga. So a development of theism in Kali Yuga. And all of this, these doctrines have something to do with time and circumstance and place. And after Caitanya Mahaprabhu's appeared, now there's no need for just come out with it, who he is. He himself covered who he was, denied his own divinity, and so on and so forth. His devotees brought it out repeatedly. And of course, at times he acknowledged it, showed it as well. So these are the Buddha, the Shankar, as we teach about it, very prominent examples of the idea, an idea that's been tossed around a bit of preaching strategies that the guru, the acharya, doesn't necessarily say it all at once, doesn't tell everybody everything. You can't tell everybody everything all at once. So the problem is, of course, when the preaching strategy is played out and effective, and now it's time to identify it as such and move on. And when you don't move on, that's when, in regard to the Mayavad philosophy, it's said in texts here, everything is lost. That's a huge problem. And the philosophy starts looking bad, but when you look at it in light of its being a strategy in terms of the time and place, then it's taken in a positive light. And so there are some examples, even in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, of preaching strategies of Guru Maharaj, of Bhakti Vinod, perhaps of Bhakti Siddhanta Jiva Swami, also his preaching strategy about Swakiya over Parakiya. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur declared it such a preaching strategy when he seemed to say that there's no Parakiya in the spiritual world, only here. Then he showed actually, secretly he said it here, this is what it means, one line, what I've written here in my commentary, Ujjwal Neelmani, Jiva Goswami says, some of it is for the other people and some of it is what I believe. So you just take that one line and says, this is what he's talking about. And this is why, there's all the logic and the reasoning why it has to be Parakiya in the Paravyam. So there are examples in our own lineage and other lineages as well. And this is the prominent one here. And so it's not that much of a stretch, if you will, to look at the empowerment of Shiva by Vishnu for teaching this form of atheism, in a sense, to more atheistic, or it's more theistic than the atheism, if you will, of the Buddha. It's a kind of, well said here, a covered form of Buddhism, in a sense. So Mahaprabhu Goswami says, according to the Mukhya Vritti, Brahma Shabde Mukhya Arte Kohe Bhagwan Sid Aishvarya Paripurna Anudva Samam. So according to the Mukhya Vritti, the direct understanding of the scriptures, God has all spiritual opulences. No one can be equal or greater to him. Tahari Buddhi Deha Shabchit Akar, so his form and qualities and so forth are eternal. But Chit Vibhuti Achadi Tanri Kohi Nirakar. Shankar's teaching says that he's without form, Nirakar. So again, he's Brahman, is the underlying thing. The form can come later. Let's try to get the Buddhist from nothing to something without content. So Chidananda Thing Muktan Stan Purivar, Tanrekohit, Prakrita Satya Vikar. The personality of God is full of spiritual potencies. His body, name, fame, entourage are all spiritual. The Mayavadi philosopher of ignorance says that they are all merely transformations of the Sattva Guna. Tanur Doshanahi Tingho Adna Koridas Aje Shunitar Hoi Sarvanash. So Shankaracharya is faultless, as we described, but those who follow him, implication is now, and don't understand him in context, then everything's lost for them. Their spiritual knowledge is lost, especially because the philosophy Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has explained, it's very difficult to be a Mayavadi and not engage in aparad to bhakti, to the form of God. And if you do that, then because you need bhakti to attain liberation, even Sahuja Mukti, even emerge in Brahma. If you go against bhakti, then everything's lost. It's very difficult to be a Mayavadi and not do that. So he says, one Prakrita Koriya Mane Vishnu Kareva Vishnu Nindar Nahi Vihar Upar. One who considers the body of the Vishnu to be made of material nature, it makes an offense. This is a great blasphemy against the personality of God. So if you offend Bhagwan and Bhakti, problem, right? Ishwar Tattva Jain Jwalita Jwalana Jiver Swarup Yoiche Spurilingakana. Now he goes on a little further. I think we'll end here. He's speaking about how he gives an example that he's taught one thing now. Shankar has said something, and why he said it and how he said it, and given us a way to think about that. And in the context of what he said, and the way he's taken the scriptures, he's reversed things and turned the Mukhya Vritti into the Gona Vritti into the Mukhya Vritti. So he's made the Ishwar personality of God in his form and qualities and so forth to be material manifestation of the sattva guna rather than eternal, and so on, and so forth. And so that's wrong. We got that part. Now he's going to go on with another aspect of the Mayavada philosophy. I think we'll go with that in the next discourse because we've talked for some time. And that is that he says here, the jiva is like, God is like the fire, and the jiva is like the spark. So of course we know spark and fire are similar, but you can't cook with spark. You can't heat yourself in the winter with spark. So there's a difference also. A key point. He's going to go through a few key points of Vaishnavism's, Gaudiya Vaishnavism's difference with the Shankar conception. He's done away with God in any tangible sense. You can't really think about him. You can't visualize him. You can't visualize Brahman. You can't think of Brahman. You can't. Therefore, the 12th chapter of the Gita says Krishna is very difficult. It's very difficult to conceive of the impersonal Brahman. And the contemporary neo-Advaitins of the modern day say that's the problem. Is conceptualization. You have to be free from conceptualization. Your Krishna idea is just a concept. You have to. Yes, but I have some. They're also offering their own. We should just be quiet then. This is the point. Nothing to say. Why are you talking? It's the no conception. And of course, greater persons than them have given us the Krishna conception. We'll take their example over theirs. But anyway, so the denial of the form, the qualities, all these sublime, the leelas of Bhagavan, Narayan, Krishna, and so forth. These all disappear. This is the point he's made. This is the first point. He'll go into the jiva and the nature of Shakti and so forth. Srimad Mahaprabhu ki jai. Kartik Vrata ki jai. Gaur Prema. Sisi Gaurara Maharaj ki jai. Panchakalpatam Patitanam Bhava
Jai.
Gaur Prema.
Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Swami Guru Maharaj ki
Jai.
jai. Is there a time that Krishna will
That's good enough.
You should run right out of the Sure.